not anything I considered work. And so of those trips, let's see, one, two, like half of them were for speaking at various events, uh, which means cities. And so Vegas was, of course, CES. Vilnius was a financial technology conference, which doubled as an introduction to the fintech sector there, which in the process, I learned a lot about getting payments from people overseas, which has been a real pain for me so far. In a word, wise.com is your answer for that. Barcelona was Mobile World Congress. Austin was South by Southwest, a tech event I may be getting a little old for, honestly. Rio de Janeiro was Web Summit Rio, where I moderated one panel. Mountain View was Google I/O, where I got there an eye full of their AI pitch. And Toronto was Collision, Web Summit's North American conference. Here's my badge. Um, and sadly enough, I'm already starting to think about what my travel will look like in 2025. The lessons learned from that travel. Number one, lounge access really is important. I had a 4 hour connection in Sao Paulo on the way to Rio, and it was nice to have a proper meal and relax, plug in my laptop, get some work done. Um, if your trip gets haywire, be nice to the phone reps and the gate agents who did not cause the problem. And if you have a credit card with trip delay coverage, know how it works and don't forget to use it. I will be doing exactly that because I should have come home from Toronto Thursday night. Instead, came home Friday morning. It's bad weather, flight got canceled, and the Chase business card I have includes that. So I just booked a room at the Sheraton, literally connected to Toronto Pearson International Airport. It was nice not to have to get on a shuttle bus. So that's the travel part of it. I mentioned AI as part of my talk about Google I/O. So I have some thoughts about that. First of all, it is weird to see how everyone is latching onto this. Tech executives increasingly use AI the way journalists use the F word, like a comma. And it's as if they think it is some sort of computational sauce. Uh, Mayonnaise, mustard, perhaps ketchup, you can just spread on anything to make it better. I do not think that's the case. I personally have seen that generative AI chatbots like ChatGPT and Google Gemini, they will just make up stuff and obvious ones. I spent more time plugging away Google's because, it's supposed to be informed by the largest, most used search engine in the world. Instead, I have seen it. Let's see, once I asked Gemini, how many iMessage users are there in the world? I thought it'd be a good stat to throw into a story about Google's RCS upgrade to messaging. And it very confidently said something like 1.4 billion. Tim Cook said this in Apple's quarterly earnings call in 2023. I pulled up the one it said. That never came up. And I said to Gemini, that's not true. And it said, oh, I'm sorry. You're right. There is no such number. Another time this was back when Gemini was still called Bard. I thought I'd have fun with the thing and said, who is Rob Pegoraro? I think the answer was, I can't give details about individual people. And I said, who wrote the Washington Post consumer technology column from 1999 to 2011? It named me and then said it won a bunch of journalism awards I've never applied for, much less been in a position to win. Thought, okay, that's weird. Let me come back in a couple of weeks. At that time, it said Walt Mossberg of the Wall Street Journal had that spot at the Washington Post. A third time, it said Stephen Levy, who was at Newsweek at the time, had that gig. So finally, I just said, this is not true. And then it finally got it right. So it's weird when you have to tell an AI, no, you're wrong. And then it will just admit it as, eh. AI can certainly be a search of unintentional amusement. I was once really stuck trying to find a lead for this story about a kind of boring development with T-Mobile doing some network speed tests. So I thought I'd ask again. I think it was Google Bard at the time. I'm just going to pull up this Patreon post I wrote about it. Oh yeah, here we go. For those of you who have memberships, I'm just going to paste the text of these things. I said, can you write a few first sentences for a story about T-Mobile demonstrating fast speeds from carrier aggregation? The results were as if you had hired a 1950s romance writer to do telecom coverage. So the first one, I'm going to read it dramatically. A hush fell over the tech conference as Neville Ray, T-Mobile's tech wizard, held aloft a smartphone that pulsed with an electric hum. This wasn't just another gadget. It was a conduit to the future, shimmering with the promise of internet speeds that would rewrite the rules of connectivity. It got worse from there. So it did not actually help me. I'll share the actual post here. Didn't actually give me a good idea for a lead. It did amuse me at least, and maybe that got some thoughts unstuck in my head because I did finally write the dang story. Um, where I do think AI can help, both Apple and Google have shown off features. I also interviewed the CEO of a company called Superhuman that does an AI enhanced mail service. Use AI to parse what's in my inbox, not outside of it. Examples, summarize what's in this message thread. Tell me where we are with this contractor. Or the example I would like to use, I want to be able to tell Apple Mail or Gmail, tell me all the invitations I have for day one of CES, or outline all the evening events for day two, because I don't want to have to pay for dinner. So, rank them accordingly to their location, which are things you can do with search, but search has to understand that maybe January 6th, Tuesday, Jan period 6, 1/6 are all the same date. And right now it doesn't. And that seems like something AI could do. What I like least about AI is when companies are creating AI chatbots. Facebook has done that, for instance. There's a company called Perplexity that has done it as well, that summarize the news, but either they barely point people to the source material, like it's a click or two away, or they don't at all. I think there should be an accounting for that. I'm looking at this from the context of there's been proposals, and in the case of Canada, outright laws saying that large platforms, especially Facebook and Google, should have to pay for links to news stories shared there. I do not think there should ever be a link tax. The freedom to link is a fundamental part of the web. And in the case of Facebook, it's not even fair. You're asking Facebook to pay for links that its users share. Facebook didn't make them do that. But if you are going to be aggregating news without sort of compensation and without adequate credit, you're asking to get required to pay back some sort of subsidy. And none of these people will have any right to complain when this thing happens. And I am taking it personally because this is a threat to my way of making a living and that of many of my friends. The last part, I think I may be more sensitive to this just because of how often I travel. If you fly in and out of Dulles Airport, you can't miss how many data centers are visible below you in Loudoun County and in Prince William County. There's a huge cost in terms of facilities, electrical use, water use to set up these data centers that in many cases are serving up lies or ripping off news sites. And, electric utilities, they're not happy. Dominion Power is saying, they're going to struggle to keep up with this. And I think the answer has got to be charge the snot out of the very wealthy tech companies jumping into AI, but I don't get to tell Dominion how to run its business. So that's the state of AI. And by the way, if you want to ask me questions, it's probably easiest to do at the end of the chat, although I'm, of course, looking at. Yep, excellent point by Jonathan there. So let's switch to some good news. Broadband. This is something I discussed in my in-person appearance last year. After years and years of it all being terrible, we have good news to report. Starting with fixed wireless, home 5G from T-Mobile, Verizon, and now AT&T is giving millions of Americans a real choice. The eye-opening stat I saw from a report the research firm OpenSignal put out a month or so ago, the fraction of American homes with a choice of two broadband providers has grown from 50 to 78%. That's huge. That's been an unsolved problem for forever, for as long as I've been writing about this. And it's fantastic. I'm going to share a link to that story I did in PC Mag. Here we go. The coverage of the OpenSignal report is actually at the bottom half of this piece about T-Mobile expanding its fixed wireless offerings. As you can hear, I've got conference voice, 3 days of loud conversations throughout the day and night. I'd like to think it makes me sound more like George Clooney, but maybe it's more like Tom Waits. But the news in broadband is not just good news, is not just about that. The federal government now requires large providers to post broadband fax labels, well, after what you see in a box of cereal, that require them to tell you exactly what you're paying for. They can no longer hide things like an exploding price after 12 or 24 months, a really slow upload speed, a data cap. They can't asterisk that away into a footnote or on a separate small print disclosures page. And by they, I mean Comcast, which has historically been terrible about this sort of thing. This is great, and it makes my job easier. Even though I will say, back when I had my Q&A column with USA Today, I did regularly make money off the fact that these companies cannot explain their own products by explaining it. If I would do an entire column just on cable upload speeds to save people from having to do this research for themselves. I'm willing to give up that line of business for customers to not be left in the dark so often. Another good thing the government has done is the broadband build out mandated and paid for by the 2021 infrastructure law, BEAD, Broadband Equity Access and Development. It's $41 billion that is going to extend fiber to a lot of places. The feds have hired some very smart people. There's so many people I know who are now working for NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is in charge of this build out. And this is going to make a real difference and, add to that number of Americans with choice. On the private sector side, so many cable operators are now responding to this threat by fixed wireless and the fact that AT&T and Verizon have resumed their fiber build out by building out their own fiber networks. Good industry analyst friend of mine recently moved from San Jose, California to a suburb of Las Vegas. He's gone from one cable provider to another, from Comcast to Cox, but in his neighborhood, Cox has built out fiber. And this guy is delighted by the fact he has extremely fast downloads and uploads. There's no data cap. There's none of that nonsense. Even though Cox in Fairfax County does not have fiber and they have the same slow uploads as everybody else, they have a data cap. So fiber is great. More of that is great. BEAD is going to build out a lot of fiber. And now we have cable companies deciding they need to be going and doing likewise. That said, there's still too many people who don't have that choice. One of them is my mother-in-law. So every time she calls or emails or texts with an issue with Comcast, I think this sucks because there's no option. Somehow neither T-Mobile nor Verizon, their 5G does not reach her home. There is no competing fiber to be built out there. So she is very much stuck. So that is unfortunate. Lastly, I wanted to sort of recap some other trends where I have not covered them directly so much, but I think there's really interesting stuff going on here, and it bears watching. In the personal computing side, the most interesting development is not really about AI. It is about the processors inside Windows laptops. Qualcomm, which makes the chips inside pretty much every smartphone out there, has been working to get into the laptop processor business. They bought another company a few years ago to help them do that, and they finally started shipping the results of this collaboration, the Snapdragon X Elite, which is a low-power, high-efficiency chip that is now in a bunch of laptops from pretty much all the major players. As part of that, Microsoft and a lot of Windows software developers have finally started doing a good job of shipping software that's been rewritten to run on these. 2 years ago, I tested a laptop that was running an older Qualcomm chip. It was a little Lenovo ThinkPad, and it was not great. The battery life was not that much better than what I have on my Windows laptop, my Intel-based one. There were real issues with compatibility. Chrome was only available in an Intel version, x86, and it ran in emulation okay, but at a real cost in battery life. Well, now there's an ARM compatible. ARM is the same basic architecture that's used in Apple Silicon. So there's an ARM native version of Chrome, which makes a big difference because that's the browser most people use. And so far, a lot of the attention of these laptops has been soaked up by the fact there's all these Copilot Plus features, like the recall feature some of you have seen Microsoft introduce, which was going to be this feature on by default, where in an attempt to make sure you would never forget anything, this feature would image the contents of your screen about every 5 seconds, index it, do some optical character recognition on the text in the image, store it in a database so you could then ask, when did I see this pair of sneakers or whatever. There were all sorts of problems, not least, do you want to have this thing on by default? Microsoft couldn't even give a clear explanation, and then people started looking at it and determined that the database file recall will put on your PC was not that secure. Any other local user could get at it. In other words, a security nightmare. Microsoft has since turned 180 degrees, so this will not be on by default. They're going back to work on this, which is especially dumb because it was only a month or two ago where there was that memo from CEO Satya Nadella saying we have to do security above everything else. If the choice is between shipping a product or doing security, do security. So people literally did not get the memo. Another one is something I've discussed a lot before. Short form social media. Twitter, now X, I don't believe has gotten any better. The replies to any given post remain some of the stupidest content you'll see because they're now prioritized by people who paid for their blue check mark. And some of these people are not nice, not well informed. Many of them are outright disinformation merchants. A lot of them are just engaged in this weird suck up behavior toward Elon Musk, which I find personally just gross. I have personally been most impressed by Blue Sky, which was spun out of Twitter as a research project a good 5 years ago, and has since moved really rapidly to build out the same sort of features that people liked about Twitter. It now has direct messaging, hashtags work. It has things that Twitter never did. You can subscribe to feeds that are user created filters. I set up one that is just a feed of posts about DC area airports. Although because the filtering is not exact, I can't guarantee that you won't see some cranky posts about John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles when I'm really just trying to get feeds about Dulles International Airports. I'm going to share a link to this, which I'm going to post it into a browser in which I'm not signed in. It doesn't actually pull up. You can read Blue Sky. Good. Okay, this is visible without you being signed in. Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. That's working about as it should. So again, plus there's some weird anime art in there. Blue Sky's fun. It is what I
Do you
missed
want
about.
to share your screen, Rob?
Let's see. Where have they hidden that?
There's a
Oh,
share
so
button at the bottom.
let's see. By the way, seeing AI companion in the toolbar here. Um, Summarizing meetings is a good use case of AI, and I've actually seen journalists say this is really good. This helps us cover school boards more effectively. And I've
It,
personally
it's
seen
act
that.
it's actually, Rob, come a long way. Early on, we did a summary. I forget which add-on app in Zoom that we did, and I posted it into our recap for the meeting. And someone, I think it was Lawrence, pointed out that the summary had changed his answer to a question from no to yes. Whoops, that seemed not
That
ready for
is
prime
a
time. But
binary choice.
I think it's gotten better over time.
Yeah. Um, Let me sort of get through the other sort of trends I've outlined here. Privacy policy, which was I guess the lead of my talk in person last summer. Shockingly enough, we have gotten nowhere. The one change between now and then, there's a new bill that people are interested in, the American Privacy Rights Act, APRA or OPRA, which is introduced by one of the co-sponsors is Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington State, whom, fun fact, many years ago, like 25 years ago, briefly worked in marketing for real networks. So somewhere in some email archive, I have email from her to me, her wearing her real networks hat. I was wearing my Washington Post hat. That seems to basically check off some of the same boxes as last year's potentially positive bill, which was, what was the name of that one? The ADPPA, American Data Privacy and Protection Act. This one is a little clearer about preempting state laws, which is sort of a must-have for many people in industry who want to get out of having to comply with potentially 50 different state privacy laws, many of which some are very far-reaching, like the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA. Others, Virginia has a law. I can't remember what it is. It is so generically named. The Consumer Data Protection Act, passed 2021, I think, went into effect either last January or this January. I can't tell you what it's done for me. I have not seen it add any new button or any new option to a privacy policy saying if you live in Virginia, you get these features. But people seem to think it was a decent first take. But I feel bad that I, as a tech policy alleged expert, really don't know what it does or what it's accomplished. It's just out there. The nice thing is it's there and it's easier to amend an existing law than to create one from scratch, which, as we've seen, Congress is not doing great at. Another privacy issue is TikTok, which I have an account. I've never posted anything from it. No one wants to see me dance or hear me sing. Um, but some 170 million Americans do get a lot out of it. And now there is this, not just a bill, look, one law Congress did pass that names TikTok and its owner ByteDance specifically as operators of a network that can be subject to the control of a hostile foreign power, the People's Republic of China, must be sold to an American operator. The deadline for that theoretically expires in January, but can be pushed out by another, I think, 90 days if the administration determines that meaningful talks are advancing. A lot of this is weird. Number one, serious people in Congress seem to have decided that TikTok is a legitimate threat, whether in terms of how it could be misused, how it's the poorly documented algorithm that seems to work so well at getting people's attention could be used to push public opinion in a certain way, or that it could be doing some sort of data collection. Even though the app itself, if you look at the permissions it requests in iOS or Android, it doesn't ask for much. You can run it with no permissions granted at all, which, have you tried using WhatsApp without giving access to your contacts list? That is how I use it, and it's a pain in the ass. So I get the feeling that these people, I'm talking serious people like Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, they've seen something from the intelligence community that makes them alarmed, but they're not telling us what it is. So I don't like that. On the other hand, ByteDance, the Beijing-based company that owns TikTok, they've repeatedly said they do not want to sell it. And in the event that, even if somebody offers to buy it, they will just shut it down. That to me would be sort of self-indicting. If you won't take tens of billions of dollars, which is what it would easily fetch, and instead we'll just turn off this and just cut off your audience, makes me wonder what you're trying to hide, why you're so anxious to not have the inner workings of this exposed. It's weird. There's a court case. TikTok has challenged this, and they may have good grounds for saying this is unconstitutional because it names this one company. It calls for special scrutiny on this one company. Kind of looks like a bill of attainder, which is right there in the Constitution. You can't pass. So I don't know. The most interesting development, I wrote about this after seeing this pitch at Collision. Frank McCourt, who made his billions from selling the Los Angeles Dodgers under duress, has launched a people's bid to buy TikTok as part of what he calls Project Liberty, which is this idea to rebuild the web on decentralized digital democracy lines. He's developed this distributed social network protocol where you would own your data, you could put it into a site, take it out, it would be yours no matter what. Social networks would be decentralized because every transaction would be written to a blockchain, which my thought was, isn't that computationally expensive? How many more data centers is that going to put on the ground in Loudon and Prince William? But considering the other people vying to buy TikTok, one is former Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. The other is Bobby Kotick, the former CEO of Activision Blizzard, who was forced out after we learned of rampant sexual harassment. So I don't know. Granted, I'm not a Dodgers fan. Many of them seem to regard McCourt's ownership of the Dodgers the way New Yorkers of a certain age think of Walter O'Malley for moving the team from Brooklyn to LA. We'll see. Let me share the link I did to that. Uh, go. And what else? And so the one other case I'm really looking forward to see happening is the antitrust case brought by both the Department of Justice and I think now does officially dozens of states alleging deeply anti-competitive behavior by Google and how it runs its display ads business, in which it has managed to put itself on every side of the transaction. The machinery that puts an ad on a page, the auction in which advertisers bid to have their ads placed on pages. Um, Essentially, there's a quote from a Google executive in the filing saying, it's as if Goldman or JP Morgan ran the New York Stock Exchange. Pretty gross. And it is remarkable because this case has been brought. Some of the parties, one of them is, of course, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland. The other is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who I personally think is deeply corrupt and should be in jail. But if he and Merrick Garland agree that you have committed a crime, you better lawyer up. So I am looking forward to seeing that happen, not least because this lawsuit calls for structural remedies, which is lawyer speak for break up this part of the company. I think that should happen. I think it was a mistake under, I think, the Obama administration to let Google buy all these ad companies like DoubleClick and lock up the entire market. That was dumb. We shouldn't have allowed it. This is a chance to break this apart because this is a big problem with journalism beyond AI, beyond the fact that there are so many bad executives. If you want to talk about what's going on at my old shop, the Washington Post, let's chat. Um, the programmatic ecosystem where ads are automatically inserted is such a mess. It is a wretched hive of scum and villainy. So much money that is made doesn't go to publishers. It leaves publishers not knowing when ads will show up and having little control over that, even when they're scammy and sketchy. It leaves readers annoyed by seeing so much dreck thrown at them. And advertisers don't know where their ads will show up, which is why you keep seeing, it's a story that somebody does every few months. Advertisers or ads are showing up next to, Nazi content, hate speech of one kind or another, even though there's supposed to be all these brand safety rules, but that's not supposed to happen. I don't know that breaking up Google's monopoly will fix it, but I know Google's monopoly has not led to any improvement in a meaningful sense in these problems. And besides, yeah, it's illegal to use your market power to maintain a monopoly. So I would like to see the law applied. So that's my state of the world in technology in these areas. So I see I got a bunch of questions here. Let me start going through them one at another here. Okay, so yeah, there are two questions about what's going on in the post. So let's discuss that. You know, I don't get to talk to people still working at the Washington Post all that often. There is a mailing list for Post alumni where we do discuss it a lot. I'm not going to, you know, betray any particular conversations. I will say there's a lot of anxiety, concern, and just head scratching over what part of let's improve the state of a major American newspaper is fixed by importing a lot of people from London. I do not get it. We've already seen one of the people that Will Lewis, the CEO and publisher, was going to bring in, Robert Winnett from the Daily Telegraph. He is staying there because apparently he did some really sketchy things, as we've learned from the reporting of the Washington Post. Um, that doesn't solve the problem that Will Lewis himself has also been kind of sketchy. Journalism in the UK, and from what I've been able to gather, it's just weird that there's this coziness between journalists and politicians that you don't see in the US. There's a willingness to do things like pay sources, to engage in what could quite possibly violate some of the laws we have about computer trespass and pretexting to get information that would never pass muster in an American newsroom. And one point I've seen people make outside the Post is if you want to gain the confidence of the newsroom, maybe we don't need an outsider. One person I think should get a hearing is Kevin Merida. He used to be a managing editor. He was until recently with the LA Times. People like him. He was a good editor, in my sense, when he was there. Because, yeah, I don't think importing a whole lot of talent is from outside is the answer, especially when, you know, you've never spent any time in Washington and you want to improve local coverage. How's that going to work? I see some raised hands here. Let me, All right, I think Gabe, you ask away.
Hi, thanks, Rob. Great rundown as always. Just some very quick comments. There was a an article in the last day or so about McDonald's in partnership with IBM having used AI in their drive-through, creating some very hallucinatory, if not hallucinogenic, uh, orders, such as 22 portions of McNuggets, or putting bacon on ice cream, other things like that. And
I'd
so
try it at
apparently
least.
after a 2-year trial, they've declared failure and moved on. Regarding cable bills, I'm tired. I like Cox very much. I like the service. I like the people, but I hate every couple of years having to play Let's Make a Deal and haggle
Yeah.
over my bill. And a promotion just expired, and I noticed a very odd thing on the bill. I was suddenly being charged $10 a month for some kind of super duper on-site technology protection. And I called them and they said, oh, well, as part of the bundle that just expired, that was free. And so because the bundle expired, now we're charging you for it, $10 a month. I said, no, you're not. And they said, oh, okay, we'll refund this month $10 and take it off going forward. But for people who don't pay attention to their bill, it's really easy for things to creep on, and that's
Mhm.
$120 a year.
What was
That's
the
a
name of
nice
this bill?
revenue
I'm making
enhancement
a,
for Cox if they can get away with it.
what was the name of this service? I'm making a note to follow up with.
I'll email it to you. It was
Yeah.
some kind of super duper on-site technology present protection doing tech support, and I said I do tech support in this house. I don't need your
Yeah.
$10 a month, whatever, but I'll send you the exact line item. And also they were telling me that more promotions were about to expire and my bill was about to go up by $50 a month.
Mm.
And they said, oh, well, we can find you $20 here and $10 there and whatever. And so after doing all that, what they told me was that through great effort on their part, they would be able to maintain the bill pretty much where it had been. And I said, that's really not adequate. And I do the usual threat of I can have Verizon Fios tomorrow if I want to. And the nice lady said, well, you should check back maybe once a week or once a month because promotions come and go all the time. And I think that's just absurd. I mean, I can't think of anything else that's priced in such an insane haggling, let's make a deal business. So I
Yeah.
probably will call
Cars
back
come to
next month
mind.
and, yeah, haggle with them some more. And the last comment I wanted to make is on data centers. And it's not just Loudoun and further west. Fairfax County is involved in that too. And there are some real controversies over what's going on regarding zoning. And apparently, some of the companies have made promises and proffers in terms of isolation from housing. And I know this will shock the audience, but they're not always following the promises that they have made. So a lot of HOAs are up in arms and gathering the torches and pitchforks to go bother the Board of Supervisors and tell them to pay more attention to promises made and promises broken and to stop letting the data centers be by right and require zoning action with community notice and hearings before allowing any more data centers in Fairfax County.
Yeah, I was telling people about this at Collision earlier this week, and they were surprised. I'm like, yes, you can absolutely lose a local election these days if you were seen as not concerned over this. Because yeah, what's I guess it's like the noise of having 1,000 air conditioners 200 yards away. Not great. Like, and I get annoyed by leaf blowers, but at least those don't, go on all the time. Was there somebody else who had raised a hand? I thought I'd seen it. Was that you, Jonathan, or?
Yeah, what I was just to follow on about the Washington Post stuff. So, am I right that the one thing the English journals were supposed to bring is a sense of how to make money, which our American journalists don't really know how to do?
So yeah, I get that. I think actually it's not necessarily true that you cannot make money. So when we're talking about local coverage, one of the sites I read all the time is Arl Now. They do great coverage of Arlington. Just kind of bootstrapped. This guy, Scott Bradbeck, he'd been fired by NBC Washington like 15 years ago, decided, I just want to have really good coverage of what is happening in Arlington. And, you know, basically what's getting built near me, what happened here, what was the story with this car crash, the things people, you might ask about on a mailing list, or if you're, in line to get a cup of coffee somewhere. And they've done that. They've most of their advertising is local companies, so they're not relying on the programmatic ecosystem. They have sponsored posts. They now have a press club where you can spend $100 a year. I actually need to pay up for that because I lean on these guys enough. They got into the Google News Showcase where they get some sort of extra money from Google. It's one of the things Google has tried to do to appease the news business, which I will give them credit for doing that. Facebook, their whole attitude towards news has just been at least a decade of bad faith behavior where they put out some new product, whether it's social readers or instant articles or the bulletin and newsletter program, then they shelve it a couple of years later. It's relying on them to come out with a new product that will support journalism is like waiting for Google to come out with a coherent messaging strategy. It's never going to happen. And now Facebook has essentially said, we're just not going to try to do anything to support news. They do not care to have a part of it. They've actually said, we don't want threads. There would be Twitter alternative to be a place to share news. So I don't understand what my fellow journalists are thinking, wasting time on threads. Stop being Charlie Brown trying to kick the football. You are wasting your time with Meta. The company is not going to change. Do not put any hopes into that. And find some other place to replicate your Twitter conversations, because also Threads is just annoying. The default algorithmic feed is hopelessly vapid. It is just not at all attuned to my interest, which is weird considering how Instagram, on which Threads was based, really does get that. Like, I'm an av geek, I'm a rail fan, so show me pictures of trains and planes. Threads, just a waste of time. But
let's come back to Meta because there's more to talk about there. But I wanted to mention, our just last meeting was with a journalist for Moco 360 that used to be Bethesda Beat.
Okay.
And so we actually pumped to our members all of the local places, including the one you mentioned, the Iron Now.
Yeah. So another good example, actually, Baltimore Banner. Now that the Baltimore Sun has been brought by some creepy right-wing dude. There's so many of these guys. Baltimore Banner is a nonprofit. They're doing great. They're doing good coverage, and
they did amazing coverage of the bridge collapse. Amazing coverage.
Yeah. So I like that. I don't need news organizations. They don't have to be a for-profit operation. It's fine if they're not for profit. I just need news to happen. And certainly, at least the not-for-profit shops, you don't see them paying their CEOs. Like Gannett's CEO made like $7 million for running that company into the ground. I could run Gannett into the ground for much less. You could pay me a tenth of that. I'd probably still do a better job than that jackass.
Okay, let's go on to Lawrence. Go ahead, Lawrence.
Have you looked at what Apple says that they want to do with AI? Their emphasis was utility within apps that you use all the time, with a huge emphasis on privacy.
Yep.
Which I was very impressed with. However, I also noticed that they did not invite the press to do any demos.
Well, I'm not surprised to see Apple adopt a very controlling approach to press coverage. I do think their attitude is correct. On-device AI, number one, it solves the problem that, you're not putting more load on a data center. You're not exporting your data up to the cloud where maybe it gets wiped from the AI's memory, maybe it doesn't. Making sure that it doesn't leave the device is one way to just foreclose those risks entirely. I think that's correct. And Google's done some of that as well. The smart replies you see in text messages, all that stuff is on device. None of it is being uploaded. Things like live transcribe, that's all locally based as well. They had this demo at Google I/O of how, and this is something they need to explain better, and they did not answer my questions, where an AI could be listening to a call from a strange number and say in real time, this is a scam. This is not your bank. This matches the speech patterns we know, all done on device. That said, I talked to a privacy expert at Johns Hopkins, Matthew Green, and his comment was, I need to know, does it listen to every call? And what happens? Does it forget that call the instant it's done? Because once you start doing on-device monitoring of threats, you want to make sure you're not creating a new store of data that somebody could try to get at later on. Apple got a lot of heat a few years ago when they were proposing to do on-device scanning for what the industry refers to with the unlovable acronym of CSAM, child sexual abuse material. The idea is this way they would try to make sure that it was not getting created or uploaded. But people pointed out that once you write that machinery, once you put it in place where the phone is looking at what you do and is watching out for content deemed bad, what will the Chinese government ask you to do? What will governments anywhere else in the world ask you to do for the sake of something that is, not universally recognized as horrible and should be illegal everywhere? Once you build this machine, someone will ask you to put it to work in some other task. Now, on-device AI, I think, is the correct way to do it. I would like to see Google focus on that. The idea that we need to have chatbots just everywhere, replacing everything. The McDonald's example was so dumb where somebody joked that, great, AI cannot even do a better job than a stoner teen. That's pathetic.
So the so my question earlier was, still to this day, website chatbots for sales support are so lame. It's like from the 1950s that if you respond with a word that isn't in their vocabulary that happens to describe your exact problem, they're mystified. How long will it
Yeah.
take for these to use some sort of elegant AI that will actually be more responsive?
That's what people keep saying they can do. There's a whole company called Intercom. I know them mainly because one of my Irish cousins used to work there, where their customer service platform, they have a sort of little chat icon you may see a lot of different sites, and now they're working to have AI sort of answer those first level questions. It should, in theory, be doable. But yeah, I remember my favorite example was actually from February, I think, where I was trying to activate a 2-day ski pass I bought. You can get what's called the Epic Pass. You can spend like $1,000 and ski all you want around the U.S., or just buy a pass that's good for resorts in a particular area. And the thing is, even at that small scale, it's way cheaper. Basically, I paid for 2 separate days of skiing in a place in the Mid-Atlantic for $95, which is now somehow what you pay for a day of skiing at like Whitetail or Liberty, which they're fun. I don't know that they're $90 resorts, but I couldn't activate it because it said, the photo you've uploaded appears to be a celebrity. I don't even know what, clearly some AI did that. And then I was like, well, okay, I should be able to call, but their chatbot couldn't answer the question, what time is your phone line open? And I'm like, hell, you shouldn't need an AI. That should be just basic find and replace. What time? Pull up whatever chart lists phone number hours. So yeah, companies think they're saving money on that, and they should be able to. There are questions that are really basic, and you want the human reps to be able to take more time and bring a personal touch and maybe have a little more fun with their work. But whether you're talking to a chatbot or a human, it's still a customer experience. And if the experience is being treated like an idiot, you spend a lot of money on AI to make yourself look worse.
Do you know, I can't even count the number of times in a chat support or sales thing that I've typed representative to try to get
I
past
was trying
the
that, yeah.
lame chatbot.
I think I don't know whether I wrote about this Epic Pass experience on Patreon or my regular blog. Let me see if I can't find this.
And then we'll come back to Tom Herlihy, who has his hand up.
Nope, that was a regular blog. I'll share that link in a sec once I can. Oh, here we go. Oop. Mhm. All right.
Okay, Tom Herlihy, you're next, and then Gabe
Hey,
again.
Tom.
Yes, thanks for this session. I wait for it every year. It's terrific.
Good.
I'm probably beating a dead horse, but I don't know much about AI. I can't understand why McDonald's tried for 2 years to, I don't know, regularize their ordering process or send it right to the kitchen or something. But is AI capable of anything real if it can't add value to the McDonald's ordering chain? Do you have any thoughts about how it could be so dumb?
I don't know what model they used. I never got, I'm kind of a fast food snob. So like, I will say when I'm on the West Coast, I love In-N-Out Burger. I don't believe they're using AI in their ordering process anywhere.
Right.
They're kind of old school. That's good. Um, yeah, like the case I am interested in, the just walk out technology Amazon had. I would go to the Amazon Fresh store in Crystal City fairly often, not least because they basically bribed me to. They would say, spend $40, get $10 off. I will totally change my grocery store shopping for a 25% discount or even 20%. I can be bribed. And the whole idea was you have so many cameras. Like imagine if a grocery store had as many cameras per capita as a Las Vegas casino. And it's supposed to, as Amazon sold it, they would just see you put, this bell pepper in your basket, and it would add it up to you and then bill it to your card, and you could just walk right out. Well, as it turns out, it was a lot of underpaid reps in India who were looking at video of this and saying, okay, which does sort of explain why you wouldn't get the final receipt until a few hours later. Apple has since, Apple, Amazon has closed that Amazon Fresh store, which is too bad. Their prices were decent for some things. But there's a lot of stores open or opening in airports. I took a picture of one in Dulles yesterday that advertised just walk out. So is that a feature they're just not going to have? So I need to ping the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, since I know they have stores at both National and Dulles. What are they expecting is going to happen for these just walk out stores when Amazon has apparently deprecated the entire technology?
And it invades privacy, I guess, a bit too. Record you're there, what you
Yeah,
buy.
well, it's in the context of Amazon where I already know, every search I do, I did have to, years ago, I did a USA Today column just on how to turn off there was some way to have it not do search suggestions, mainly because I had checked the price for a toilet seat and Amazon thought I was collecting toilet seats.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Who is
Back
next?
to
Gabe.
Gabe.
Yeah, I just put a link in the chat for an article that I just read about apparently a service, a business, a company that is letting authors create chat dialogues that will be used with AI. So while you're reading Moby Dick or Romeo and Juliet, you can engage with a chatbot with the personality of the author who created it and discuss the book that you are reading. And so that strikes me as extraordinarily bizarre. I mean, I have trouble getting through books as it is. The last thing I want to do is go down the rabbit hole and engage in philosophical discussions with a chatbot programmed by some current author, not the person who actually wrote the book. But anyway, it's an interesting article
That's so weird.
with yet another strange application of AI.
Yeah, yeah. My first question is, who asked for this? Like, what's the customer demand that led to,
Well, somebody with a lot of money thinks that
yeah.
it's a good idea to provide it. What could go wrong with that?
Mm. Yeah, wow. I missed this is crazy.
But there's a lot of energy in this, just like you said starting out, Rob, where if you, I don't think it would be easy to even track the number of people, companies that are starting trying to do something with generative AI. But um, at some point, you know, thus far, I think people have been trying to add up the positive and the negative. And it's hard to see the positive outweighing the negative in the short term here.
Yeah, and the weird thing is the tech industry just doesn't seem to get it. That they seem to think they can just sort of hand wave, this is going to be great, revolutionary. And no, there's a lot of anxiety. I mean, like last summer, my mom asked me, "Are you worried about AI?" Which that is not the usual topic of our conversations, but it's gotten to that point, and it's especially weird when you have people like OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, who they spend half their time worrying that AI might destroy the world, and then like we're just going to build it anyways. What is it with you people? Um, but yeah, it's really not the first time I've seen lots of tech startups show just an inability to function like human beings and actually listen to their customers.
So another thing I was wondering about, if you're ready to turn back to Meta again,
Yeah.
is
Yes.
what you think of the litigation against Meta by the states that about all of the child stuff and the press about it. I mean, I used to be a government lawyer, but when I'm looking at it and when I'm seeing that Meta was prioritizing, watch time by young, teens, it's hard to see that they're not going to go down for this at some point.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Like number one, I think I am not. So I was just discussing this on a podcast yesterday. The Surgeon General calling for a government mandated health warning on social media, which what I pointed out was he posted a report last year in which Dr. Murthy said, there are certainly cases where social media is healthy. This many percentage, like majorities of teenagers said it was helpful in these cases. So it's not like smoking. Aside from like 1950s ads, no one has said cigarettes are good for your health in these cases or, in these contexts. So the comparison, I think, breaks that way.
I don't
Uh,
know. It let people keep weight off, right?
I guess, yeah, help prop up certain agricultural economies in the US. So, yeah, the issue in general is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act just does it's written to allow companies to moderate stuff as they see fit. The consequence of that, as has been interpreted by courts, is that it is hard to bring a case against a social platform for choosing to run its site, its service in a particular way. That was not sort of inevitable. There's a really good book. It's a short read, 26 words, They Created the Internet, by my fellow Arlington resident. Let me just find a link to it here. Jeff Kosseff, who I've never actually I've met only once in person, but from social media interactions, I think he can't live that far from me. I know we've, you know, and he points out that a lot of the cases that defined how CDA 230 is applied could have gone other ways. The judges could have said, we're going to view it narrowly, but instead they said, we're going to go by the most literal meaning of the words. And so I think you would have a hard time bringing a case on sort of product safety. Doesn't mean Facebook can't get in hot water in other ways. In general, like I've mentioned how I see them in terms of their treatment of journalism and the press. They're not a company that I fundamentally have a huge amount of confidence in to do the right thing, even though like they have lots of individual people who do good work. I know some of the current privacy guy, Rob Sherman. He's a good man, but yeah, so much of what they do I think is not helpful, and they could win this court case but still suffer reputational damage. And I think fundamentally it is not good for the internet that so much social power is concentrated in this one company, which is another reason why I think people who are latching on to Threads as their Twitter alternative, that is just delusional and self-defeating behavior. You know, give Facebook more business is not, cannot be the answer. And again, I think if I could invent a time machine and get the government to not allow Facebook to buy Instagram, we would probably be better off for that.
WhatsApp too.
Right. Yeah, although that's the one that's changed least. Um, and yeah, it's that sometimes is the Facebook platform that's hardest to avoid. You travel internationally, you're going to be in a WhatsApp group. It's unavoidable.
Well, that's maybe the one smart thing Facebook has done is to keep WhatsApp distinct with its strengths, right?
Yeah, yeah, that app has certainly changed the least. Um, I haven't seen it. Oh, so actually, I meant to ask. This is something I was going to post about earlier today. I think for the first time, I'm starting to see sponsored notifications in Facebook. Like in my Android app. Yeah, because I'm used to you see a number on that little bell icon, like, oh wow, did a friend of mine post something neat? And no, it was just a straight up ad.
So it was trying to look like a notification, but it was actually an
No, it
ad.
was actually in the notification thing, but now I can't see it. So what's going on here now? I mean, I can't say I was surprised because so much of the feed on Facebook, I'm going to scroll down on my phone right now. Post from a friend, ad, friend, friend, friend. Actually, this is unusual. Okay, ad, friend, 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 ad. It's weird. Usually I can't go more than like one swipe of the screen before I see a suggestion for a group that I'm not interested in or a suggestion for a page that I should follow. Did I enter a cheat code or something? Because this is actually less annoying than usual. All right. Well, more
Can we
research
go
is
back?
needed.
Yeah, can we go back to Gabe? Go ahead, Gabe.
Yep.
Yeah, just another link that I posted. I tend not to agree with anything at all that the Cato Institute does, says, or is, but I posted a link to an article of theirs where they're against every state doing its own local regulation of AI. And I probably have to agree with that. The idea of 40 or 50 different places regulating AI, it just seems like an impossible concept.
Yeah. It's actually Jennifer Huddleston. I've known her since she was at the American Action Forum. She is one of the people I do lean on to get a free market minded critique of tech policy.
That's funny. Words to fear. I'm from the state government and I'm here to help the AI with the AI
Yeah.
risk.
Yeah, in California in particular, the Sacramento has a habit of passing these really far-reaching bills. Like they're now once again considering a bill to require Facebook to pay for links to news sites. That yeah, I don't have high expectations for what the California State House will do in the area of tech policy. In part because it's California, so you can always get voters to pass something even worse.
Now, wait a second. Did California do something for social media privacy when the federal government has seemingly been paralyzed about that?
California Consumer Privacy Act, it's got a lot of sweeping requirements. The main effect has been that whole do not sell my personal data button, which you see on pretty much every site. Although I did have fun. I found one travel blog I read. I was doing a piece about this. and I realized the button didn't do anything. I emailed the guy. He's like, "Oh, I had no idea it's been broken for 6 months. No one had actually noticed." Um, some ways it can be helpful because California is such a huge chunk of the US. So I think there's a more recent privacy law that require browsers to comply with would basically be you could change one setting that would say, you know, I do not consent to tracking cookies, only things that are necessary to make the site work. And it would essentially be the equivalent of clicking through all those cookie dialogues, but you just make that change once. And so if enough companies build that into their sites to comply with that, then it works across the US and in a way that makes things more private without making more work, without having your web experience cluttered with yet another dialogue you have to get through to actually read anything.
Well, and then if you add that to the European rules of privacy, has it almost got to a point where we're making incremental progress, and it would be great to have our own national law, but it doesn't look like we're going to get that anytime soon.
No, the phrase I've been using for that is policy outsourcing. Congress does nothing, so we hand the job to the European Parliament in Brussels or the California Assembly in Sacramento, which works up to a point because European tech policy is really prescriptive. I've skimmed the entirety of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's a handful.
Is
And
that summer reading, Rob?
yeah, it's cure for jet lag, waking you up at 2 in the morning. And same thing with the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, the Digital Services Act, the DSA, which have compelled real changes. That's why your experience with an iPhone in Europe is already different because you can use competing app stores, you can sideload. On the other hand, apparently a lot of Apple intelligence features will not be available in Europe because Apple doesn't think they can make these already privacy optimized features compliant with these new regulations. Now, the question will be, do people in Europe feel like they're missing out on all that much? Hey, George.
Go ahead, George.
Hey, Rob. It seems like every business is now incorporating this membership business model into their plans now.
Yep.
But now with the FTC going after Adobe for making it hard to cancel subscriptions and having these hidden fees, do you think this is going to shift that membership business model that so many tech companies and services are relying on? Or do you think we'll ever go back to the days where we used to have a yearly license or something where we'd purchase outright versus these monthly memberships? Because I know personally, I have to go and review each month and cancel all these subscriptions because I'm not using them all the time. Because
Well,
my
you need
priorities.
you need to sign up for a subscription to manage your other subscriptions. The AI will look at your bills and tell you what you should or should not be paying for. Um, yeah, I mean, in some ways, it does make sense. So, for instance, I've written about this on Patreon, and I actually need to do a more detailed review. I used Intuit's Mint for the longest time. I started out, my personal finance adventures began with desktop Quicken for the Mac, where you would just buy it and then you would run it. And it was kind of a pain. It was a ton of work. Mint did things entirely online. It would get the transactions for you. You had much less bookkeeping to do. It was free with ads, and then Intuit neglected the hell out of it. And eventually, a bunch of the people who had first developed Mint before Intuit bought the company jumped ship, started their own company, Monarch Money, which is strictly on a pay basis. And their business model, I think, makes sense. They're charging $100 a year, which seems like a lot, but I mean, I do have a business to run. I pay over $100 a year for a PO box that gets nothing. I get to have anybody send any like sort of whistleblower letter to this post office box I have at the Watergate post office in DC. It was a little cheaper there because I guess they're not open on weekends. And so, yeah, spending a little bit of money to make sense of the money my wife and I make makes sense. And that's a case where I think it totally makes sense to have this be a service you pay for. They're running this web application. They have to ingest and manage a lot of data. They are pushing through pretty continuous improvements. It's not some static application. Not everything needs to be a service. And yeah, things like photo editing, does that need to be? I don't know. How much do you want to pay to have some AI sauce put on the top of it. And when companies engage in what the actual term is dark patterns, where it's much harder to cancel the subscription than it is to open it. And I'll note that newspapers have also been guilty of that sort of thing. The FTC has begun to take interest in that and take a look at it. It's not an easy thing to define. There was a bill Senator Warner introduced, I think, a few years ago that was going to try to criminalize dark patterns. It didn't get anywhere, but the FTC has general authority to take action against exploitative or deceptive trade practices. And you don't need a book definition of those to decide that if you're struggling to cancel the subscription, that's probably a dark pattern. And that's a case where you shouldn't be trying so hard to retain this customer's money because this customer will tell their friends that they resent being stuck in the subscription. They don't know how to cancel.
Do you know we had a pie presentation by a woman who's a journalist for CBS News in New York, their Money Watch, I think it was. This was several years ago about dark patterns. And ever since then, I see it all the time. Yeah, one of the prime ones is just the one you described, where it's so easy to sign up for a service, to subscribe, but when it comes to unsubscribing on their website, it's maddening, which is one of the reasons why Apple subscriptions is so helpful. Because when you open the subscriptions app on your phone, unsubscribe is one button and you do it and it tells you when it will end and that's it. But the other one is just the web design where you're led through a bunch of blue screens to the next screen. And then the final blue screen, instead of being what you intend, is something else where it's a different color, that your eye misses to actually continue. And that's everywhere. So it's almost like we have to get to
design nerd in general.
We have to get to the web design schools to get them to stop teaching that.
Yeah, actually a friend of mine just sent me a meme. I think I could paste it from messages into this. Copy. Can I paste an image in here?
Is that a video?
It's an image comparing the size of the average close ad button.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and news sites also bad where you visit the site, there's the dialogue to sign up for the newsletter, which my pet peeve, I'm visited, this will happen when I'm reading like the Dallas Morning News or the Seattle Times. I don't live there, and you can tell that from my IP address. Why are you wasting my time with this? And then can we show you notifications? That's another click. Then the cookie dialog. That's a third. Finally, I can read a story. And then, of course, I get to the bottom, and you have the worst ads of the bunch are the sort of taboola, what we call chum boxes at the end, full of just completely schlocky stuff. That's my reward for finishing the story. I get the worst ads of the bunch. I just don't understand how this business can just be so broken.
Do you know, once I remember there was talk of, I don't know if it's called micro spending, but the notion that
micropayments, yep.
Micropayments that, if the LA Times saw that you were on the East Coast, rather than trying to continue nag you to subscribe, said, pay $1 to read this story,
So there have been many different attempts to make it work. And it's one of those things that seems instinctively like, I'd totally pay 25 cents to read this. There are big issues with billing. There's a certain amount of money you pay to run a credit card transaction. So really micropayments is not worth it. Usually the attempted workaround is some sort of way to aggregate that. There was a site that I thought had a good idea called Blendle, which launched in the Netherlands, had an endless public beta in the US where it was closed invite only. And the idea is you would put $5 in, and then you could then flip through their app or their site to any partner publisher. And the nice thing was it discouraged clickbait. If you finished reading the story and were disappointed, you had an instant refund. The problem is it never got out of beta, and the clowns running it just seemed to not care to try to make it work. And that bothers me. If you're going to try to help my business, please be serious about it. Do not waste people's time taking forever and just not signing up companies. And when they finally pulled the plug, it was not a surprise. I thought there are other ways to do this. Like one thing I suggested a while ago, and this is something I run into when I read, I'm trying to keep up with news in Virginia. Like I don't follow news in Richmond enough to subscribe to the Times Dispatch. Same thing with news from Roanoke. But if I could pay some add-on to my post subscription that would cover some subset of stories where you would hope somebody in Richmond or Roanoke or Blacksburg or Seville would realize like they're not going to get me to sign up. I'm not that much of a Virginia political junkie, but it's money they weren't going to get otherwise. Then, and they didn't have to do any customer acquisition, do that. Another idea, I actually fleshed this out on my own blog. I'll share that link too. There are lots of places that do recaps of morning links. Greater Washington is one good example. Great urban development blog. I actually have written for them all of once. Where's this? About military flyovers and why they come as a surprise.
Oh, you should write for them again, Rob.
So actually, one thing I do want to do, given all the time I spend in airports, people love to complain about the walk from Metro to the terminal at Dulles. And I want to compare that firsthand because I can speak from experience. Toronto, it's actually a longer walk, considerably so, and the train comes less often. London, the Piccadilly line is quite the hike from T2. I know best there. San Francisco, it's not too bad, but have you tried getting from there to the down the peninsula? It's a huge pain. To point out that basically anytime you were adding rail transit to an airport that was built decades earlier, it's hard to make things all that efficient.
The walk
Yeah,
at National is pretty long to the Metro too, isn't it?
Not really, but if you're flying out of that new terminal they built to replace Gate 35X, that's a hike. And you will spend just as much time walking there as you would at Dulles, or close enough to it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the other idea I had to make things work for occasional readers, something like Greater Washington, they work out some deal with all the sources they cite. For instance, they'll often in their breakfast links they'll have a link to the Washington Business Journal, which is paywall only. There ought to be some way for them to. Thank you. No, it's a good thing the ad is not too schlocky. WordPress ads, sometimes they're good, sometimes they haven't been terrible outright lately, but some of them are pretty gross, I guess, or just the same ones you see all over the place. Anyways, the idea is GG Wash would somehow prepay with these other sites. And so their readers clicking through that link would get to read the story without paying directly. And then I would pay Greater Washington to get access to this stuff, have some way to aggregate it by subject area, not necessarily location. And there's got to be some way to make it happen because yeah, people do want to read things. It's annoying to run into a paywall when, you're not going to read that site all the time. And there's got to be some middle ground between either the reader signs up for a full subscription or they go looking on Reddit or one of those random news archive sites like archive.ph for a copy of the paywalled story. Because right now there's nothing in between. What spreadsheet am I looking at? Here we go. Is the attendance going on everyone's permanent record?
Oh, so one thing I wondered about, Rob, since we weren't able to arrange this to be a live meeting, if there's a Pi member who lives not far from you, do you want to maybe put your swag in a box
Well,
that
I
they
did
could?
actually pull it out. So there's a bunch of things. This is a t-shirt I got from Google I/O. I don't know what the design is, but I'm sure it's tasteful. I have so many socks, socks like you wouldn't believe. Yeah, these are from Trend Micro. Very nice, geeky design. Random little bags. This is the one I got for being a speaker at CES, about the right size if you need to carry a lot of charging cables. You have a little laptop cover of some Cloudflare socks, very stylish. A little travel mouse. Uh, Lots of reusable shopping bags, more than I know. Oh, actually, that t-shirt I was going to give to a neighbor of mine. What else? Notebooks. There's always a classic. Even more
So
so.
how does this year compare in swag to past years?
About the same as ever. I will say I think I'm seeing fewer t-shirts, more socks. I wish the quality of the socks were a little better. I actually like a loud pair of panel socks, but they need to be comfortable. And many of
Hmm.
these are more they're made to look good, but they have no real cushioning. You know, if people start giving out Darn Tough makes an outstanding hiking sock. So if and some smart publicists will latch on to have them make their socks, and people will be lining up to get logoed socks with that
There
kind
you
of
go.
oh, actually, there's a whole other thing I forgot back here. I mentioned Comcast.
Jonathan, are you still wanting to share your screen?
Let me stop that. Yeah. Thanks, Van.
Comcast had an event at their headquarters in Philly in February. I took the train up for the day. They have this giant swag bag, which what would like this is like a headphone sized bag with the Paris Olympics logo on it. This is about the size to carry an iPad mini, I think. Am I like a kid doing like a haul video for TikTok? Hat, fish lid. Oh, and an umbrella, actually useful. And of course, yeah, the shoulder bag is, and it doesn't, it has the Paris Olympics logo on it. So you're not going to be walking ad for Comcast. I think that's it for the, yeah.
What I was going to ask is, you know, might you want to offload that stuff for someone to pick up, and then they could bring that the next time we have an in-person meeting, so people could make use of the stuff.
That could work. Yeah. Who among your all y'all is based in Arlington or close enough?
Anybody in Arlington?
This is Van. I live in Arlington.
Okay. Well, shoot me an email. I am actually out of town next week as well, but then I've got a whole like 3 weeks at home in a row, which is going to be super exciting.
So are you
Okay.
going to get back to baking, Rob, or wait until the weather cools?
Actually, I was doing that last night. I had to make some sandwich bread. I was out and decided to make some cookies for good measure. But yeah, today I the rest of today is going to be all indoors. I've actually been getting back into woodworking a little bit because we finally had our kitchen redone, and I wrote about this on my blog. Kitchen dividers. You know, I like to have my knives and forks and everything neatly separated, and you can't buy ones that are actually sized to the exactly to fit your drawer per se. So I decided I was going to make my own from scratch, and it actually worked out okay. It was more time than I expected because I'm kind of a measure twice, cut twice, anyways, guys. But you know, they look good, they work, they're sturdy, they're actually screwed together. I'd done it years before, glued together, and that did not really work so well over time. Let's see here.
Van, do you have Rob's email address?
Well, let me share my contact information for all of you.
So Rob, the actual dividers between the things, those are all screwed, or are they tongue and groove, or what?
My brother, who's actually really good at woodworking, I will share you a link to his Insta in a second. He would probably do tongue and groove because he's got a whole shed full of every kind of woodworking hardware you can imagine. Yeah, this was you do have to aim a drill very precisely to sink a screw hole in a quarter-inch thick piece of poplar, but it can be done. And so yeah, it's all pretty solid. And yeah, now I'm going to rebuild a spice rack I built years ago because the old one does not fit the new countertops. So that'll be my project for this afternoon because in the basement it's nice and cool. So if any of you ever spend any time around Melrose, Massachusetts, you may be able to see some of the creatures my brother has made.
Sorry, I'm just putting into our Google thing for the door prize for the meeting today. So it looks like Rich McKinney, are you still in our meeting here?
I am still here.
Rich, it looks like you're the winner of the door prize for our meeting today. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, Rich, would you like a $25 Apple gift card or an AirTag for
I'll take
the door prize?
I'll take the gift card.
The gift card. All right.
Yeah,
So we'll
that's
keep a
great.
record of that, and if I'm organized enough to be able to access the Pi iCloud to do this, I will, or I'll send it to Roy. So just be patient for the next couple of days, okay, Rich?
All right. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Rob. Great presentation.
Thank you.
So where do you travel next, Rob?
So next I'm off to LA. It's sort of mixing work and fun. Our kid is really into a lot of like online streamers of various kinds. There's this conference called VidCon, and I'm
Mhm.
like, why don't I cover it? Plus, the other reason, while I'm in LA, I will be able to try out the Waymo robo taxi service, which I've not been able to try it out yet. I have not spent any time in the city of San Francisco proper, but
Didn't
I
they
was able to
disable it in San Francisco?
briefly. I was the Cruise is the one that had a sort of full retreat. Waymo is the Google-owned one. They've been at this longer than most. They started out in Phoenix, expanded to San Francisco, Austin, LA. I know their publicist, I met her at South by Southwest, so she was able to get me off the wait list. And yeah, it'll be fun. I've enough friends have taken the service in San Francisco. Somehow no one at PC Mag has written about it, even though one of their guys is based there. So that'll be a nice little bonus of that. I'll be able to catch up with some friends. And after that, actually, the next work trip I have is also related to autonomous vehicles. There's a company called Aurora based outside of Dallas that is working to make long haul trucking autonomous. And Texas prides itself on its business friendly climate. So they have a permit to operate this in Texas. So they're like, why don't you come on down? We'll give you a ride in the truck with a safety driver on board. And I'm like, you know what? Actually, I can make that work as a day trip.
Oops.
Oh, thank you, Lawrence.
Rob, thanks so much. Pi members, any last questions for Rob?
If you think of any 10 minutes later, you have my email address, and I'll know to put you to the top of the queue.
And I guess the last thing is, um, Rob, you don't need another, or would like another Pi mug, would you?
I'm actually in pretty good shape. I'm knocking on wood. I hope I don't jinx myself and break one tomorrow morning. But no, I think I have now two that are do a fine job of allowing me to fully caffeinate myself in the morning.
I'm glad to hear that. Oh, so if you want, just so we can update our photo, could you send us another selfie with a Pi mug?
Yeah. When was the last time I did that? You must have a really old one then.
About 3 years ago, I think.
That's not that far. There are some profile pictures out there that the relative lack of gray hair is now noticeable.
Distinguishable is what I would say.
You know, I've earned these gray hairs. I have no regrets about them. All right. Well, if people have no further questions, I will take my leave and
It looks like Aaron has one. Aaron, it looks like you have the
yeah,
final word with Rob today.
Hey, Rob, sorry to prolong this. I just thought of a
no
question.
worries.
You had mentioned Snapdragon earlier in
Yeah.
your presentation. Just wondering if you'd venture a guess on how long it will take for Windows on ARM PC shipments to surpass Windows on Intel PC shipments. Do you think that that's a like 3-year horizon, 5-year horizon, or do you think
I
it's
actually
going to happen?
that is a realistic possibility, in part because now so many vendors have jumped into it. There's an emphasis on this that there never was. I mean, I remember when the first Surface shipped, you could get it with Windows RT, I think, which was an ARM version where there was no compatibility layer, and no one wanted to buy that version because it was so limited. Um, but now, yeah, this has become sort of a first tier choice. And among laptops, yeah, we might reach parity sooner than you think, and 3 years seems certainly plausible. Especially, obviously, it depends on what Intel does, but they have not been able to match Apple Silicon in terms of battery life and power efficiency. And Apple should be enough competitive pressure by themselves. And so when you have companies like Dell and Lenovo and HP, leaning much more into Snapdragon X Elite than they did for the previous, Qualcomm's branding is a mess. What was it? 8CX Gen 3? So I have to know, Qualcomm hired my good friend and former PC Mag editor, Sasha Sagan, as a PR guy 2 years ago. So now I can make fun of their brand names to him directly. But it also maybe I get a little more insight of what they're doing now because the communication is a little better.
Oh, I hope that works out for you in the future. Let me at this time say thank you to the YouTube